Welcome to Moving People Forward with Mark Elfstrand. This program is a series of conversations on commonly seen challenges in everyday people's lives. We hope you'll be inspired by the stories you hear today. Perhaps you know of someone who would also benefit. Be sure to share the program link with a friend. Now, here's Mark.
A cohort was an ancient Roman military unit. But you know what? A cohort is also a group of students who work through a curriculum together. And the teamwork of learning can have a profound impact. One benchmark of young leaders, it seems, in this age is the fact that many dream of making a difference in our world. And there are likely many ways of doing that. Creative partnerships working towards a common goal is certainly one way. Well, today you're going to hear about an international bonding of young marketplace leaders that are building a future together. And we're going to talk about how they do that. With me today on Moving People Forward is my friend Tommy Lee, the president of a group called Resource Global. Tommy, welcome.
Welcome, Mark. Good to be here.
You know, I really hated to have to pull you away from fantasy football. I know that really is a priority in your life.
Basketball now, too.
Oh, basketball, too. Okay.
Yes.
So who's your starting quarterback on your fantasy football team?
You know what? This year I picked up Lamar Jackson.
Oh, you did?
Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so how are you doing overall?
In second place.
Second place.
Pretty well.
All right. Well, we're going to be cheering for you in the days forward. Well, I first met Tommy when you were a senior assistant to the president of the Moody Bible Institute. I mean, that's kind of an interesting job to have to begin with. How did that one come into play?
You know, I had spent about 10 years building cell towers at a company called American Tower.
Okay.
And so from that point on, I did that for about 12 years, went to the seminary at night for about 3 years, and then was a pastor for about 3 years. Realized God never called me to be a pastor, and that was just something I did not want to do. And randomly one day, I get a phone call, and it was from a Dr. Michael Easley asking me if I was interested in a job.
Yeah.
And then so I get up there, I meet with him, and they were looking with someone for marketplace experience, pastor experience, church volunteer experience, and I was the only one in the seminary that they were able to find, and that's really how it started.
And so you had that job for a couple of years.
Yes.
When did you start Resource Global?
You know, we started really in 2010.
Yeah.
And so our current iteration with young marketplace leaders is in the last 5 years. But in 2010, we were just trying to figure out where we were going, what the lay of the land was, and everything like that.
Now, we should mention right away here that you have a brother who's very close in age to you. Tell me about that.
He is 2 minutes older. And then we have a younger sister, 2 years younger.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And what does he do?
So he now has moved to Phoenix, and so he works with this organization called Mission Create. His wife's family is there, so they decided to move out there.
But he was working with you in this, wasn't he?
He and I first started Resource Global, and I actually was the president of our for-profit company, Create Possible.
Yeah.
He ran Resource Global, and then he transitioned out. He tends to operate more in the secular, political world, and so he does better at that area.
Okay. Now, you have also had some health challenges.
Yeah. 2 years ago, I was diagnosed with cancer in my sinus. And literally, Mark, I thought it was just a sinus infection. And so one day, my nose, right after Christmas, it just started bleeding for an hour. And for 5 straight days, it just kept bleeding. And the doctor says to me, you have a tumor. I'm pretty sure you have cancer. And ironically, Mark, so they did test, biopsy, everything like that. And then he never called me. My surgeon doctor calls me and says, hey, I'm here to schedule your surgery for your cancer surgery. That's how I found out. And then later on, then the doctor says, I'm sorry, that was never supposed to happen.
Right.
And so that's really how I
kind
found out.
of just missed that little piece in the middle where he's supposed to call and tell you about this.
Yeah.
So are you doing okay now?
I am. You know, I had to work it through because it took me, the doctor told me that it was going to take me 9 weeks of 24 hours of pain from my nose to my throat to my mouth. I pretty much lost the ability to taste solid food, could only drink, but lost all my saliva and was in pain 24/7 for 5 straight weeks. Inside my nose, inside my throat, and outside my neck as well, too.
Cancer in the nose, isn't that rather rare?
Rare. They said it really affects a lot of Asian men, but it's a rare. It's one of the more painful cancers,
Yes.
but easily curable, but it's very, very painful.
All right. Now, if I remember correctly, didn't you graduated from, was it the University of Washington?
No, Washington University,
Washington
St. Louis.
University in St.
Yes.
Louis.
Yeah.
Okay, I knew there was a Washington. I knew there was a university tied
Yeah.
in there. So what was your major?
So I went in as a chemistry major.
Okay.
So my parents told me upon graduation from Whitney Young High School,
Yep.
doctor, lawyer, engineer, pick one.
I see.
got accepted in University of Michigan, University of Illinois, and WashU. And WashU gave me a full ride with their scholarship, and that's how I ended it as a chemistry major.
Okay, so what did you think you were going to do
I
in
thought I
life?
was going to be a doctor.
Yeah.
After a semester, I realized,
Wow.
yeah, that's not what I'm going to do.
Well, you did have also an early vision, right, around the time you graduated from college, that you wanted to impact the world, right?
And I would probably say, Mark, it really started in high school because I had a youth pastor who grew a ministry from maybe about 50 kids to suddenly 2,000 kids in junior high, high school, college, everything.
Yeah.
And I looked at him and I said, man, if he leaves one day, how do you replace him? And led me on a journey of how do ministries or how do churches really create a leadership pipeline? I kept asking that question from high school to college. I said, Lord, how do I get involved in the global ministry of doing something like that?
Okay, there is a particular Bible verse that seemed to impact you in your thinking about this, Acts 1:8.
Yep. And it says to really take the word from Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria to all the ends of the earth. And really started during my time at Moody Seminary, where hermeneutics class, a professor by the name of Julius Wanloy Singh, made us break down that verse. And he challenged us after an hour of breaking that verse, what does that verse mean to you? And how are you going to live that out? I kept asking that question. And Mark, I had just finished college ministry at the Chinese church in Chinatown, Chicago, and high school ministry for 15 years. And during that period of time, I probably had 1,500 students go through the college ministry. But I said, Lord, what does that mean to impact the world? And how is what you're teaching me through my 15 years with all these students going to affect me? And so that really led me on that journey.
So when would you say that the real vision for Resource Global took hold of your heart?
5 years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, and the reason being is a Christian foundation was really focused on Southeast Asia, and they noticed the shift in global missions moving from the West to the global South.
Right.
And so they gave me a grant and says, hey, we want you to look at Jakarta and really be able to give us a creative way of looking at missions and ministry. And they were my first funder of this particular foundation.
Okay, so how about a mission statement? You must have one.
Yeah, and I will probably say it is to release, restore, resource, release, and restore young market cities around the world. And these are engaging young marketplace leaders.
Yeah, we're going to explore those three a little more in detail here coming up in just a moment. But you've been at it for 5 years. Do you feel like in some ways you're ahead of the game, behind the game? Where are you?
It has grown more than I ever thought we would be where we are at. And the whole idea is how do we catalyze young marketplace leaders in these global cities, indigenous leaders who are not dependent on funding from the West to integrate their faith and work to make a difference in their city. I never thought we would be where we are right now, Mark.
Yeah, well, we've talked about it being a global impact, and that is really what you're looking at. But how so? Well, we're going to get into that more in just a moment. We're going to take a short break, then we're going to continue our discussion here in just a moment with Tommy Lee, the president of a group called Resource Global. And we're going to look at the long-term expectations from Cohorts that he is getting started, and we'll get to that coming up as we continue in just a moment.
God is our safe place and our strength. He is always our help when we are in trouble. This word of God in Psalm 46:1 says it all. God is our safe place. He is our strength. He is our help when we are in trouble. Whenever and wherever we are invited, nationally or internationally, Lutheran Church Charity's mission is to bring the mercy, compassion, presence, and proclamation of Jesus Christ to those who are suffering and in need. LCC is a ministry of presence. to be present with Jesus, to lift up people in times of joy and sorrow, in prayer, and by passing through donations of dollar per dollar to those in need. Through our K9 ministries, we respond and deploy with boots on the ground and pull-outs within 24 hours, often sooner, of any crisis or disaster situation we're invited into. You see, for us, the bottom line is making a difference by being present. For people who are suffering and in need with that mercy, compassion, presence of Jesus Christ. Thank you again for allowing us the privilege to stand alongside and serve others. Jesus and your partnership make that possible to touch thousands of lives.
This is Moving People Forward. I'm Mark Elfstrand, and we're discussing a very interesting topic about, well, how you resource a global world in terms of using marketplace leaders. And we're talking with Tommy Lee, who is the president of a group that actually trains people to do this, and it's called Resource Global. Thank you for joining us. Okay, Tommy, so let's get into the global side of this. I know you've got some activity going on in both, Jakarta and also Nairobi, and well, how global are you, so to speak?
So right now, these days, we started out with Jakarta and Chicago, because Chicago was our test kitchen. Last year, then we started Nairobi, and then now this year, coming with our first cohort, we have Singapore now, Orange County, Austin, and Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia.
Okay, all right. So let's come back to that word cohort.
Yeah.
I kind of said at the beginning of it, it's usually a group of people that are kind of working through a curriculum together. Are they working through a curriculum?
Yep. So the cohort gets together for about 8 straight months.
Okay.
So during that period of time, they have a theme that we make it very, very general. Gospel-centered living. We have calling, integration of faith and work, justice and mercy. We make it very, very broad. The last 2 weeks is understanding your city. The reason we make it broad is because it looks different in each cities. Every single city is struggling and contextualizing what that means. For instance, in Jakarta, we're going to emphasize a little bit more of the gospel narrative and calling. Chicago will look a little bit different. Nairobi will look a little bit different as well, too. And so we want our city directors to really be able to contextualize that thought. And so they meet together as a group, usually 12 to 15 people in that city. And from that point on, they're paired up with a mentor in their area in industry. So for instance, a startup founder is paired up with another founder that's older. If someone in marketing is paired up with someone in private equity is paired up with someone in marketing. So they have a mentor that they meet once a month.
So how do you find these people?
Literally, when I go to a city, I literally just network. The one skill I realized I could develop, I could go into a random city and build a network. I will talk to anyone and everyone, and after a couple years of networking and developing, but then I have to hire a local city director and put a local city board together to work through all those things.
All right, let me come back to those 3 R's that you were talking about: resource, release, and restore.
Yep.
Yeah, kind of tell us about each one of those.
And so the whole idea of resource is that during the cohort, we find different ministry marketplace leaders locally or in the U.S. to really be able to come on and teach on one of these different topics.
Okay.
Whether it's a pastor in L.A., whether it's a Crawford Loretz, or whether it's a marketplace leader like Bob Dollar, different things like that. We find it from the U.S. or anything like that. And then from that point, we release them. We challenge them and say, what does that look like for you? What are the passions that God has placed in your heart? What are the skills that God has placed in your heart based upon what you're doing right now? And look at the city and how do you address some of those things and restore? How does what you're doing eventually make a difference and impact in your city for the gospel that's more long-term?
Okay, so Tommy, when a person completes the cohort, kind of what's next for them in life then?
You know, a lot of times there is usually for one step, we have to try to measure how effective we are.
Right.
Every single cohort member is challenged to do one gospel action plan. And so, for instance, what is something that God is placing in your heart? Let me give you a couple examples.
Yeah.
Number one, there's this wonderful girl who graduated, her name, let's call her Julia, who graduated from the University of Michigan with a degree in graphic design, came from Jakarta, Chinese Indonesian, worked in New York as a graphic designer for a number of years. Then, after a number of years, went to work for her family's business. Her dad wanted her to take over her family's business, which rents out boats and everything like that to drill for oil. And their biggest client is a client or country in Europe. And so one of the passions that she has, there's 13,000 islands in Indonesia, but there's not a lot of doctor and medical help. So while she was in University of Michigan, she realized, wait, there's this ministry called Mercy Ships that brings boats to all of these places. So now she took one of the boats, and because her dad says, just take one of the boats, she retrofitted and now is equipping it to send that boat to all of us, stocked with doctors and nurses and everything like that. Her and her friends in Indonesia had to raise the money to retrofit this boat. It cost about $1.2 million. They raised $900,000 amongst their peers in Indonesia.
So do each one of these cohort members, when they complete this, do they have to have present a vision statement for where they're going next?
A plan, not a vision, a tangible plan.
Okay.
Give me a tangible plan. Yeah.
And that's kind of like your graduation exercise?
That's my graduation. And we mapped that plan over a course of 2-3 years. And from that point, many, let's say, for instance, in Jakarta, we're on our 5th cohort now.
Yeah.
Many of our first cohort are now our future teachers, our future mentors, our future donors. Indonesia, Jakarta now is no longer funded by the U.S. It's all funded locally. So now they become our board members, they become our teachers, they become our mentors, they become our funders. And they're making a difference in the city.
So you're big on recycling then, is that what I hear you say?
It is helping them to have a vision of how they take their skills to make a difference.
Okay, now we talked about the international, the aspect of the global, but you also said that Chicago is your test market for a lot of this.
Yeah.
So what is happening of significance in the city of Chicago?
You know, I look at Chicago similar to like I look at LA and Austin as gateways or key cities.
Okay.
And so for Chicago, how do I work with the different churches like a Park Community Church, Moody Church, Progressive Baptist, to find key leaders, bring them together to learn from each other in the city? Because Mark, actually once a year, we bring all of our cohorts together. Chicago, we bring Austin, we bring in Jakarta, Nairobi, we all gather together in Los Angeles. And for 1 week, for about 4 or 5 days, they gather together to learn from each other, they network with each other. What the goal is, how do the folks in Singapore learn from the folks in Chicago? Chicago learned from Nairobi. Nairobi learned from Austin, things like that, to create one big network.
Okay, you told the story of this young woman, and it sounds like she's turned this into a pretty significant project.
Correct.
A lot of hours, a lot of effort put into this, right? Okay, but what about just the simple integration of faith and work?
Yeah. I think the biggest challenge is a lot of times it's more than just, hey, let's put a verse on the Bible wall. Let's put a verse on my screensaver. Let me share my faith. It's more than that.
Yes.
That is, if you're an engineer, how has God gifted you to be an engineer? How has God gifted you to be an architect? How has God gifted you to be a designer? How has He developed you? What are your passions? How do you use that to make a difference in your work and also ultimately your community and your city and your church?
But in what you're developing here, cities really are your mission field for all of this activity.
Yes. And cities, in terms of building one big global network, where in this day and age, the cities and the world is smaller. And so it allows us over technology or in person once in a while for cities to cooperate with each other and learn from each other.
Okay, so Tommy Lee years ago has this thing in his heart that says, I want to make a difference in the world.
Yes.
I want to make a kingdom difference. How's that working out for you at this stage of life?
I'm telling you, Mark, I mean, it is the thing that I've been seeing for the last 5 years in terms of what's happening globally. I mean, I'm seeing leaders who are running startups, family businesses, everything like that, utilizing their philanthropy, their gifts, their skills, everything. and they're impacting the world. So for me, a small little part is involved in what's happening here.
And that cancer that you had in your nose or have dealt with hasn't slowed you down, apparently.
Well, you know, the one
bit.
thing is, I realize we don't have too much time left. But Mark, the one thing I was reminded last week when I was thinking about Resource Global, it is going well.
Yeah.
Better than I ever expected to be.
Yes.
But it all started going well when I went out on cancer.
Yeah.
Well, I was gone for about a couple months for cancer, and it really felt like God told me, Tommy, remember, as this thing grows and it
Right.
goes well, don't take too much credit for it.
Yeah.
Because all of this grew, Indonesia grew, Nairobi grew, all that, when you went out on cancer. Don't ever build a ministry around you or take credit for it. I could have used anyone to do this. And so continue to build a network around these young marketplace leaders, making a difference for their cities.
Well, I love your enthusiasm for this, and may it continue.
Yeah.
And may the global impact that you had vision for just expand in the days ahead. Thank you for coming and sharing with us today, huh?
Thank you so much, Mark.
Yeah, we certainly appreciate it. Well, that's going to do it for our program today. As sages have told us, grow in wisdom, think humbly of yourself, and love one another. May it be so with you. Join me next time for another Moving People Forward. I'm Mark Elfstrand.
Woof!